Hello and welcome back to Our Stories, His Glory. I'm excited this week to welcome in my friend David Brown. I got to tell you how we know each other because David, we spent many days, hours and days on baseball fields together, but never in the same dugout. In fact, he wasn't even in the opposite dugout. He was an umpire. And people don't think that coaches and umpires can be friends. David, how are you doing today, sir?
Rusty, I'm doing fine. You and I have been trying to get together and do this, and we share the same passion. I am thrilled to be able to come and speak to your followers, man.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think you are going to have me on your podcast. I guess you call it a podcast at some point in time soon. So you're going to turn the tables on me and put me in the hot seat. I understand, right?
Absolutely.
Well, good. Well, but today you're in the hot seat. Actually, we'll both be talking a lot. First thing, before we get into some of our baseball stories that I know some people tuned in to hear, just tell folks a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how you ended up kind of where you are now. We'll go into your faith journey a little bit later, but just give us some basics about David Brown.
Well, Rusty, I've turned 60 this year, and I'm proud of that.
Good.
I grew up one of 11. Right here in Rutherford. I could probably throw a rock to my mom's house. Well, I used to could. It's probably a 5-minute ride to my mom's house. Okay. All my siblings are still living, save one. My oldest sister, Patricia, passed away in 2018. Actually, while I was working a regional in Arkansas. And my good friend, Brandon Henson, will tell you that's probably one of the best plate jobs I ever had that morning after I cried my eyes out. But come from a big family. I tell people it's probably why I'm a little narcissistic, because I was right in the middle, a little hard-headed. But we didn't grow up with a lot, but we grew up with a grandmother and a mother that fostered us and gave us every bit of love they could. Got into umpiring at 14. Good friend of mine, neighbor, needed little league umpires, and I was selling grit newspapers, making $6 a week. Umpiring paid 18, so here we go. That's where the journey started. And so here we are today, after a long and career in baseball that's still going, but it's taking me to the supervision side, Rusty, and that's the blessing that we'll get to in a little bit.
Okay, so you outlasted me because I hung up the coaching shoes or whatever you hang up when you're a baseball coach in 2019. I'm still going strong doing other things, but so you're still rolling, but you're a little bit more into the administrative side, but you still have a very strong resume and you're going to be doing the American Legion World Series again.
I'll be doing the American Legion World Series for the 17th time. Okay. People need to understand why I'm still doing it. And I did an interview on my site with Jim Quinlan, who is the state's commander now. Jim's a good man. I come with a storied American Legion background history. They know me. They don't have to pay flight to get me in. I'm well versed in ESPN TV games, and so there's plenty of reasons why they keep me around. Not bad in the locker room. It's not because of my umpiring, trust me.
It is. I know you're being modest. I know they get you. Yeah. And I said July, but that's actually in August 12th.
It's in August. August 12th is when we start up. Yes.
Okay. So let's go back and look a little bit about and talk a little bit about some of our journey together, because I started out as a high school coach, then a junior college coach, then a Division II, and then eventually at Gardner-Webb Division I. Tell me how your journey in umpiring kind of related to that and how we kind of moved along together.
Yes, I remember Rusty, and you're going to have to help me. Lander first?
Well, I was at the two junior colleges, North Greenville and Brevard, and I got to Lander in 97.
See, as we get to be 60, we forget. But I started in baseball and then moved into Division II in about 1998, 97, 98. But I was doing junior college at Brevard.
Yep.
I remember a good friend of ours, Porky Spencer, was supervising the umpires.
Yep.
That's what Barry Chambers and Dave Brown, people don't understand, we all got started with Porky Spencer as our supervisor. And we were umpiring games for Rusty Russ, your name's Stroop Strap. I hear people say it.
I hear people say it a lot of different ways too. We say strap, but I answer to Stroop because it really looks like that. But it's just one of those things you kind of get used to. Not everybody can have an easy name like David Brown.
Absolutely. That's why I got on The Price is Right one day. That's for another day. Okay. But we started with Porky, and then you moved to North Greenville. We had your games at North Greenville. Then you went to Lander as I started moving up the Division II ladder. Umpired your games at Lander.
Yep. Correct.
And then I think your next gig was Gardner Webb. Is that correct?
Fall of 2002. So my first season was around 2003, and I looked up and there you were. I don't know if it was the first year, but eventually you did games at Gardner Webb.
Well, I was high up in the Division II ranks in 2002.
Okay.
I worked 2004, 2005, and 2006 Division II World Series.
Okay.
So I was just beginning to get on the Division I radar as I started working games for you as you transitioned over to Gardner Webb.
Yeah.
So technically, I probably still didn't understand what I was doing fully when you first encountered me in Division I. But we grew together.
I'll say
we grew together.
No doubt, because I didn't understand what I was doing either. So we got
absolutely.
So we had some really exciting games during our time, and some exciting moments. I think back to a couple. I know you were behind the plate in Shelby in 2013 when we played South Carolina, and there were 6,000 at least people there, and about 5,000 of them were dressed in that scarlet from South Carolina. Here's the story on that. You were behind the plate, and I didn't realize, because we had a lot of Gardner Webb. I thought we had a lot of Gardner Webb people, and the colors are fairly similar. And I thought, wow, we got a lot of people supporting us. And there were. But when I went out to argue with you on a play at the plate, in about the second inning, I got summarily booed by the home crowd because everybody's pulling for South Carolina. And I have no idea if it was a bad call or not. You know how it always come out for the guys. And I went back to the dugout and I told my assistant, I was like, wow, they hate me here. There's South Carolina people everywhere. I thought it was at least the third Gardner Webb, but it wasn't. But you remember that night?
But that game, I remember that game. I think South Carolina was highly ranked.
Yeah.
And I think the night before, I think South Carolina was ranked either 1 or 2. And I think Wake Forest was ranked just the opposite. And I'd had Wake Forest the night before. So that was probably the apex. I was probably on my 4th Division I regional. Mm-hmm. Those are the games you remember. Those are the games that stick out, especially when you have you umpiring for people like you and Coach Tanner at that time. I tell you, I can't say enough about Coach Tanner. He's not in this interview, but to have you and him on the same field, 2 class acts, you don't forget those kind of games, Russ.
Right. And so just a couple things here. That was 2013, and we actually won that game. Now, I did some against Coach Tanner with you there, but that particular one was Chad Holbrook's homecoming in Shelby, if you remember. He had just taken over for those guys after Tanner retired.
After the World Series.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so Chad had the homecoming, and we were on a terrible lose. We'd lost 4 straight and not playing well, and they were playing great. The odds of us winning that game that night were so small, but yet lightning struck, not literally, but figuratively, and we were able to win that 7-6. And you had a really good game behind the plate, and you didn't waver. You didn't give the big national champions any breaks. You called it straight up. And no offense to my good friend Chad in thinking that Ray was still there. I know 2013, he had won 2 championships and moved on. But Chad, the reason you got booed so bad is because Chad is such a hometown hero with his father in that town. Look, there's no misunderstanding why you were booed that night, Rusty. That family is well versed in Shelby, and Chad, they love Chad there. So And they
You probably
deserved it.
upset a lot of people that night. I'm sure you did.
Yeah, there was a few little people dressed in red that were ecstatic. So I hope at least the ones from Gardner Webb weren't booing me, but after the game they were happy. I want to go to another one. We had a little a game over in 2015. End of the year, Campbell, Gardner Webb, absolutely huge rivals. We're both fighting hard. We were fighting hard for a playoff spot in our tournament. And the game, I didn't even realize it was the last out of the game, but the guy it had been real intense. If you remember, I think you were behind the plate, and it ended on a double play, but it ended with my guy sliding into second. Their guy thinks he slid too hard. So as my guy was starting to get up, he pushed him back down. Then my guy throws a haymaker at him, and the bench is clear. What do you remember about that day?
What I remember about that day, Rusty, and honestly, the reason we're having this interview is because God is so good, and he moves you, and he takes a lot of humility out of your life. I was at first base in that game.
Oh, first base, okay.
And when I go back and look at the film, I think I missed a whacker at first, which would have maybe ended the game. Don't correct me here if I'm wrong, but there may not have been a play at second had I not missed that call. And look, as a human being, I can say that now with straight face and not have a bit of pride at all. But I was at first, and when I go back and look at that play from time to time, and you think about, well, had I not missed that play, maybe that play didn't happen. But look, reality is the play happens. And we have a bench clearing brawl.
Yeah.
Guy went in at second, a little bit hard. And I think your guys took offense to it. Their guys took offense to it, whichever one was on the offense.
Yeah, we were on offense.
Yeah. And I'm gonna click here, my video, and I want to show everybody my logo for my website, his space.
Okay.
You see the way the guy's arms are outstretched.
Yeah.
Well, Rusty, yeah.
I know what's coming.
That's how you looked. That's how you looked at third base when you were trying to hold your team back from rushing the second base area. You were just like this.
Yeah.
And I remember vividly, Rusty, you cut a backwards somersault when about 80 of your players barreled you over.
Wow.
And you bounced back up. You had a scratch on the elbow, and God bless you, but the brawl was on. Yeah, and at that point in time in games, when a game gets to that point, umpires, I went in early. I a little size, and I was going to pull some guy. Hey, but at some point, self-preservation kicks in, and you say, hey, this is a train wreck. So you step back and you take names and numbers, and basically the best way to do that, just figure out who's left in the dugout, and then you can figure out where the ejections are going to go for leaving the bench.
Nobody was in the dugout.
Just figure out who's left in the dugout. At that point, there was so many people on the field. Figuring out who left the dugout versus who's still in the dugout. That's where we were able to figure out who needed to be ejected and who didn't. Yeah. That was one of the worst situations I was involved in. And as I said, I'll go back, play then. One of you guys would have came out and said, hey, take a look at that, and then we could have got it right or whatever. But needless to say, that is a vivid memory in etched in my mind. You doing that backwards somersault, my friend.
Yeah, and so the whole story on that was I didn't mean to leave my kid hanging at second, and I later went, and I'll give you that in a moment. But I started running out there, and I realized, I bet my whole bench is coming, and we're close to the end of the year, and they're all going to get suspended. I thought the whole team was going to get suspended. We'd have to forfeit. So I turned around and put my arms out, and I saw a senior coming right at me. And we only had a few games left, and in my mind, I was thinking, if he gets to that and throws a punch, his career's over. So of all that herd coming at me, I tried to kind of tackle him, and all I did was slow him down because, as you mentioned, he rolled me and it cut my arm, and he doesn't even remember that. He was going to take up for his teammates, but it turned it into that wasn't one of those where two guys square off. That's where there's just mass chaos going on all at once. And I did see the kid, one of my favorite kids, the one that was in it from the beginning. At one point in time, he was on the ground trying to fight for himself, and there were three guys on him. So I just went, I knew I couldn't hit anybody. So I just went and laid on top of him so they wouldn't keep hitting him. And I took a few shots in the ribs because they were still throwing punches, and I was laying on top of him, and he appreciated it. We talked about that to this day. I said, we got each other's back. So I think a lot of people from both teams got suspended.
Well, I remember two things I remember vividly from that, other than you being rolled. One was there was a kid for Campbell that threw the most vicious haymaker that connected that I've ever seen in live baseball.
Yeah,
that's number one. I won't call his jersey out, but it was a sucker punch, but it was the most vicious.
Yeah,
punch.
And it was from behind, kind of the kid. It broke his jaw. He had to go have dental.
Yeah, but it was definitely a cheap shot.
Yeah,
it was. And the other was we spent. I remember Tony Thompson was supervisor then. We spent 4 days before we settled on everyone that would be ejected. That was going back and forth with the ADs, the NCAA, and looking at film and gathering additional film. For some reason, additional film started showing up. So we had better angles, but that's the unfortunate part of baseball at times, Rusty, but you and I have been involved in a lot of games that ended much better than that. Absolutely.
And that's just a memory now that fortunately, other than unfortunately the one kid that had his broken jaw.
Yeah.
The kids that the alumni still talk about today, like, well, we had each other's back, and they're not even mad at Campbell. They were like, hey, they were doing what they were supposed to do. It's still a big rivalry, but nobody's around that remembers that. But they were saying like, hey, if we were at Campbell, we'd have done the same thing. So we had many times on the baseball field where we got to talk between innings, or sometimes I come out and take up for my team. Tell people now what you would like them to know about umpires. People have this conception or maybe even misconception about umpires and their egos. What do you want people who are listening to this to know about people who are umpiring games?
Well, it's a good question, Rusty. And you know what? The last 4 or 5 years of my life, when God has really, I'll tell you about the shot moment when he jerked me up and really got my attention. I'm glad I'm getting to answer this question now. I'm glad you didn't ask me to answer this question for your viewers 10 years ago. It would have been a different answer. What I would like for people to understand about umpires is that person that sits and yells, don't quit your day job. See, there's a weird dichotomy with umpiring amateur baseball. Rusty Strap is getting paid to put beans and corn on his family's table and with baseball.
Yep.
Dave Brown's doing it to pad his grandkids' college fund.
Right.
That old adage, don't quit your day job. Trust me, I wouldn't. A lot of people, we wouldn't. There's lawyers. You would. I don't think the average person understands the level of professionalism and individuals that we have in the amateur ranks of umpire. We're human. We go home to our wives. We go home to our kids just like you do, just like they do. And we're going to make mistakes. Why can I tell you that I look at that play and I have a trained eye and I think I probably missed that play at first? Why would I say that in an interview? Because it's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's about being real, setting your humility aside and being honest. And I would think that people would want an honest person on the field, because we umpire and officiate sports. It's an imperfect. Sports is imperfect. You know that as well as I do.
Yeah, right.
The kid that goes 0 for 3, you're not ripping him. You got to figure out a way to get him to connect with the baseball. Umpire misses a call. He's out there beating himself up internally and cannot let you see it or anyone else see it. And we're human. And let's tie this to leadership in a little bit. I'm in the leadership of Division II. I have two conferences, South Atlantic Conference and Conference Carolinas. And one of the reasons I still want to stay around the game is to lead umpires. I think that a Rusty Strap would like to have an umpire who has a leader who is also giving him tidbits on life. Baseball's not the end game. When you go on that field, if Rusty can see the human, the child of God, mm-hmm. everything starts to fall into place. So I honestly feel, man, that part of the reason I'm still involved is to bring that side of it back and to let my umpires know when you go out on that field and you make a mistake, it can't be personal and the coach can't feel it's personal. And the only way to do that, Rusty, is to see God in that person. And we all saw God in you when you came out to argue play. And it's not like we took that for granted either. Don't you dare think we took it for granted. We knew when you came out, there was going to be no cursing. There's going to be no dancing around. You were going to ask your question. You were going to agree to disagree. And you're going to go back to the dugout like a gentleman. There's not enough of that. And so to answer your question, if I could get your viewers to understand one thing about umpires is look at a person's walk, look at their actions. And when you see God, then you see past the umpire or you see past the official. You see a person and you begin to understand what this is that we're doing, even though Rusty's trying to put beans and corn on his table. That's what I like to see. Wow,
that's incredible, because one of the things over the years, I didn't get thrown out once in 93 and once in 96. And I had to then. It was so bad that I was like, my kids wouldn't think, and I didn't curse. I just stayed out there. But I went all those years at Gardner Webb without that. And one day, one of the guys in the, one of the umpires I can't remember which one, was having a conversation. And it was like one of the last years it might have been my last year. And he said, nobody wants to throw you out. Nobody wants to be the one. And I said, why? I mean, because I get my money's worth, and they said, because you don't curse, and everybody's waiting for you to curse. And there's this kind of thing like, don't be the guy that throws Strap out, because he doesn't curse. And if he does, you can. But I was like, gosh, I don't know if that's a compliment to me or, that I'm popular among umpires. Like, what coach wants to be thought of as popular among umpires? But I would always tell my assistants over the years I would say, let's let him do his job and let's do ours. I mean, we're too busy trying to do the umpire's job. They're not missing them on purpose. I would tell my assistants that all the time. Of course, in the heat of the moment, you don't really know whether to believe that, but there was very few times, and it only happened early in my career, that I felt like an umpire was vindictive and missing a few on purpose, but never once I got to the Division I level. And I would tell our guys that, and our coaches, and anybody would listen, these guys are trying to do their job. If we try to do their job, we're distracted from doing ours. They're not doing it on purpose. We're just highly emotional. And when we're emotional, we start dreaming up these reasons why we're not getting calls, and they're not true. Would you agree?
I would agree. And when you say highly emotional, I would say there's a very fine line between highly emotional and paranoia. And Rusty, I keep going back to my walk of faith right now.
Yeah, please do.
And it harkens me back to what God has given me in my life now. He's given me a great deal of discernment. I can be on the field now and be totally honest with the coach, because I'm working hard. I'm not gonna, if I make a mistake, sometimes you just tell, hey, that pitch is on me, because guess what? I'm not gonna miss that pitch again.
Yep.
But there are times when I say there's a fine line between paranoia and being emotion. Wound up.
Yeah.
What I mean is, there are times when it will come to me, this is a lost cause. And I don't want to use the word, I'm not going to use a derogatory word. I'm just going to say that I know when the gig is up. People usually can be talked to, and there's a point in which they can't. And I thank God that I usually see real quick when the gig is up. Now, it's our job as umpires to keep coaches in games. You remember the day when, you said this, you're gone. Those days are over.
Right.
It's part of our jobs to keep you guys in the game, because you don't want to go before. I don't want to get your superior's name, your president, your provost, whoever, your AD, and start defending why you're getting ejected every night. That could take beans and corn off your table.
Yep.
But at the same time, replay's taking a lot of that away.
Sure.
But discernment in people and recognizing, hey, that's a really good guy. Doesn't change anything.
Right.
But man, it's pleasant. Because I'm going to tell you, third base coach at South Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. There's something you just know. I ended up having a conversation with him, and you got people of God out there on that baseball field. It's almost like you see them. And it's a different feeling now when I'm on the field. And I carry that with a badge of honor. That discernment. It's nothing you can share. It's nothing that you can give away. It's nothing you can buy. But it's one reason why I'm still involved in baseball and umpire. So.
And there are some very high quality guys. People, the old joke, I hate to even repeat it because somebody else might like. So the old joke was there can't be any baseball in heaven because there won't be any umpires there to call it. So
look, there's so many. There's so many. And people have fun with them, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day,
there may not be any coaches either, but
trust me,
I agree.
The list of St. Peter's is going to be striking coaches off right and left as well. But I hope that in the end the redemption thing puts us in the same bucket, and we're all able to call some balls and strikes in heaven and yell at each other a little bit up there.
That would be fun. And there's some guys that I yourself included, because obviously I have you here for a reason on this show, but there's some guys I think real highly of: David Pritchett, Randy Vestal, Tyler Simpson, Lindy Hall. He got his experience with me, and Bill Klein a long time ago, and I think of John Haggerty, Barry Chambers, who you mentioned, Paul Larson, who's passed away, was just a fantastic human being. I really hate that I'm leaving some guys out that you and I
look.
both
You
know.
you could go down the line. I'll mention Barry Chambers.
Okay.
I mentioned Barry Chambers, and the reason I want to mention Barry is if you look at the landscape of Division I baseball, and I work now for two very, very outstanding supervisors in Troy Fullwood and Paul Gillier.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look at Barry Chambers, there's two ways that you can sort of come through the ranks of baseball. I umpired a lot of Legion baseball. I saw a lot of pitches, saw a lot of games. But the pro game, those guys are getting paid for repetition. So I know you were around enough to see the influx of pro umpires into the college game.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys have seen 3 times the number of pitches that a Dave Brown seen. And that's what makes those guys a little step above the average amateur umpire. They were actually paid to umpire. Now they're amateur umpires, and they have they were having the paid repetition of pitches every night in the minor leagues. Barry Chambers is an example of a guy who came up like Dave Brown, worked 2 Division I World Series, who didn't have that paid minor league repetition, but still made it. That's why I want to mention Barry Chambers.
Yeah.
He did it the old way. He did it the right way. And he's a good friend. And for all those guys out there that's thinking, I'm not in pro ball and I'm not going to be able to umpire in college. No, just look at Barry as an example. And there's none better on the baseball field, and the way he did it without the paid repetition is outstanding. So you mentioned so many guys, great umpires, good people. I did want to highlight that about Barry, because I think that story, as far as me leading young umpires in my conferences, they need to understand it can still be done. And those two supervisors that I mentioned will give you a chance. They will. And
most coaches will too. I mean, we're just so anybody's thinking like I would never be an umpire. Here's what we're doing from our end. Anytime it was a young umpire, I was figuring out real quick what his limits were. I was figuring out real quick what I needed to do to establish a relationship with him and advocate for my team. And some guys were quicker to say, sit back down, and other guys listen longer. But I tested every single one of them. And Lindy Hall can tell you that. Lindy Hall can tell you that right away. That I tested him. Macon Hammond, was young. And I really kind of went after those guys, not aggressively like me, but I was making them. I wanted them to prove they deserve to be there, and hopefully they understood that. But hey, I want to do this because I don't want to get too far into this without getting to your shot moment, because you've referred to it several times. I think you're saying 4 years ago, something definitely clicked, shocked. I want you to tell us about your faith journey and how it led to that moment and what's happened since.
Well, I think to start, you'd have to start with my grandmother, Carrie Vance, and my mother. There's a song that I love. She's got me talking to Jesus. Grandma was talking to Jesus. Grandma talked to Jesus, and I heard her. Wasn't really into it, but I heard her.
Yeah.
And there's a line in that song that goes, "Mama used to drag me to church, polo shirt and khaki pants and polo shirt. Didn't want to go, but I went. Now she's got me talking to Jesus." Well, look, I'm not here today without my grandmother and my mother putting God in the same room with me. Okay. I picked up a lot that I didn't adhere to. All right. You can throw it against the wall. Let's see what sticks. Well, they were throwing against the wall. There wasn't a whole lot sticking with me. I would say this: a good friend in my prayer group in the mornings is the spiritual locker room. It's a group of men. We get together at 6:30 my time. Most of those guys are in the central part of the United States. 5:30 their time. I'm up every morning at 4:30, praying, meditating, and I got Brother Charles Stanley to thank for that. I don't know how anyone gets to Caesar's world, and I call it Caesar's world because you got Caesar's law, Caesar's rules. If you learn to play it, you can make a lot of money, but it's not going to get you into heaven. But so I'm up, we're praying, and in that locker room, there's a friend that Chris Daniels that told me one time. He said, "Dave," he just started looking. He said, "God's been in your life, walking with you for a long time." So when I talk about my grandmother and my mother, what I mean is I know who God is. I've known who God was.
They planted those seeds in you, didn't they?
Yeah, they planted those seeds, which just now are starting to bear a little bit of fruit. But I knew who God was. It wasn't as if I was running around searching. God knew who he was. I just thought I had a better way to do things, a better way to live my life. Maybe I won't die, So I go through life and struggle with some addiction early in my life, and I went through 2 marriages. And I'll say this about marriages, Rusty. I think you've been married to the same lady all your life, correct?
Yep. Well, 35 years.
That's good, and good for you. Yep. Absolutely. But I will say this about marriage: where there is 2 in a marriage, if God is not in it and you both using him as the center. And if I could use an analogy, if you give me a second.
All right.
In officiating basketball, we teach triangulation. You got a lead, a center, and a trail. If you look at it and you draw a triangle, lead, center, trail. If the lead moves over, the trail should move back, and the center, then the old trail turns into the center. So now you still have a triangle. So if one guy on a basketball crew moves, the whole crew moves. You keep the triangulation so that you see plays. Same thing with baseball. You triangulate the throw, You triangulate the runner, you triangulate the bag. Everything's coming to the point, the middle of that triangle. And that's why you see good umpires make great calls, because the throw, the runner, it's all a triangle, and you want to be where you can see the angle. Same thing with a marriage. Father should be at the head, the triangle, then the mother, the kids, but God has to be in the center of that triangle. So if the husband's out here doing his own thing, that triangle gets lopsided. It's no longer, now it's a rectangle. Or if the wife's doing her own thing, or if the kids are wayward and if God's not at the center, that triangle's gone. So I use that analogy, and I wasn't a very good head of the triangle in my first two marriages. And it was because I was lacking the center part of that triangle. That was God in my life as the head of the family, as a male. And so when I speak to young men now, and that's the one, I use that analogy all the time, and it sort of hits home.
Wow.
Now
that's prolific. I mean, that's earth shattering, because you're exactly right. The husband, the wife, Christ at the center. I will tell you, and then I'm gonna let you keep going. I don't know how marriages make it that don't have that. I don't see how they make it. Go ahead.
Well, that's how I'm gonna end the marriage thing, is they don't make it. In my locker room, we've got guys going through divorce, and people can't see it. And when I tell you discernment, you can't beat it into people, but it's simple. Life is so simple for me now. If God is in the middle of it, there's no worry, there's no trepidation, there's no anxiety. When you listen to him, he's in the middle, life is good. So I say that to say, hey, I've been through 3 marriages. I have a beautiful wife now, Tammy. My son's giving me 2 beautiful grandkids. And so I'm going through life, and I'm working 2 jobs. Basically, as the umpire, the fan would say, hey, don't quit your day job. Yeah. Well, I was engineering, doing pretty well. 6 figures. No, I'm not going to quit my day job. Yeah. But Caesar's world, it starts to grab you, Rusty. And you're trying to have and gain and get, and how much money do you need to make? How hard are you going to run yourself to staying ahead when there's no God in the center?
Right. Wow.
Here today, gone tomorrow. So I spent a lot of my life in that tumbler. I call it a hamster wheel. So people on this hamster wheel. What you don't realize is there ain't any sides on the hamster wheel, Rusty. You can get off anytime you want.
Yeah.
We get caught up in life. 8 o'clock in the morning, the kids are yelling, the boss is calling, we got to get to work late. Now, no time for God. You're on that hamster wheel already. Well, at 4:30 in the morning, I get up. I don't need to get on the hamster wheel. The hamster wheel has sides. Get off the hamster wheel. I implore me, get off that hamster wheel of Caesar's world. Find God. Don't be that guy that God is. And I equate God. He's walking. When my brother Chris said, Dave, God's been in your life a long time. I said, well, God's been walking me like I walk my dog. But when I walk my son's dog, Ella wants to run up and hit that bush and chase the squirrels, and she's pulling me and my back's hurting. Man, that's how I've been walking God for 40-something years. This is how it looks when God is walking me up the street. But he's a patient God, and guess what he does? He forgives, he's slow to wrath, and he'll continue walking me because he gives me free will.
Yeah.
So where does that take me now?
Right.
So that shot moment, I'm upstairs and I'm on my knees. And I had left a well-paying job to go help a friend's daughter was dying of cancer. And God was talking to me. I've heard the voice of God. And I had just started the transition of listening to God, Rusty. And he said, go help this friend, help your friend. So I went, turned into a commercial paint seller. Yes, I did well. Mm-hmm. You know, I could probably sell paint. I could sell the devil some things back when I was talking to him every day. And I did that for 3 years. And then one day God said, hey, less is more. So I'm up on my knees and I'm praying and God is like, okay, what next? And I felt the hand of God grab me and touch me.
Wow.
I felt him touch me. And he said, oh man. He said, you will go do my will. Mm, 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 mm. I said, how? He said, you know how. I'll be with you every step of the way. So I started looking around me. I've got a website. I'm involved in sports. And I just held on to it. I wanted to hold. I didn't want him to let me go. And I tell people it felt like I was shot. So in my locker room, they said, well, Dave, have you ever been shot? I said, no. They said, well, how does it feel when you've been shot? They said, well, how are you going to testify to people when you've never been shot? I said, well, that's a good point. I said, so I'll tell you how it felt. It felt like everything I had ever done to hurt anybody in my life was stripped out of me, Rusty.
Wow. All at once.
Every bad call, every bad word, everything. You talked about being made anew, right?
Sure.
And I ain't turned back. And so that's, to me, that's what, so we have a brother in the locker room now that's been shot 4 times. So I can't wait for him to tell me what it really feels like, because I have to equate the two in the same breath. But I haven't turned back. So I started a website called His Space. And excuse me one sec.
Yeah.
I started a website called His Space. And I said, so what do I do now, God? He said, well, guys like Rusty. He said, tell my story. Use Rusty. Okay. So I start calling people friends in sports, spiritual friends. I have a couple pastors I'm really close to. He's guided me toward a prison ministry. I had tried to start a men's group in my church and in my town, and it never took traction. But that's going to happen. But he's opened the door and he's made a way. And when he said less is more, Rusty,
yep,
I can only tell you exactly. I can only explain to you how he has fulfilled every promise he told me he would. I don't ever ask questions anymore. I don't.
Wow. That, like, you're earth-shaking stuff here. That's
no.
a big
It's we just touching the iceberg, but
yeah.
He is everything he says he is. Everything he promises you. And this is the beauty about the Father that I love and serve. He gives you free will. And my brothers in the locker room are helping me understand when I have a passion for umpiring. You've seen it. But when I have a passion for moving people toward God, I don't understand sometimes. But they remind me of how long he walked with me while I was pulling that leash up the hill and chasing squirrels. And he let me do that to get me to where I am. So it's giving me great patience when I try to do his will, when you run up against a brick wall. He designed it that way, Russ.
And I would add to people who feel like they've made enough mistakes that they're past that point. I told a group of youth last week when I was given an opportunity to speak on a mission trip that it doesn't matter if you've fallen into a hole 300 feet deep. God has a rope that's 301 feet long.
Yeah. And
you had your shot moment, and it didn't. That's Holy Spirit. That's what that is. That's
yeah.
That's him. And you know, I really like the part about your grandmother and your mother planting the seeds. And we plant seeds. Now I'm preaching, but we may be planting seeds for trees that will grow many years from now that we'll never see the shade of, but somebody else will. And we may not know what seeds we're planting. I hope that happened with some of my players. With me, I hope that happens with you and the influence you've had. But people have to realize that they don't always get immediate results. But as Isaiah 55 11 tells us that God's word does not return void. When we plant those seeds, they're going to show up and become shade trees someday. We just don't know when. And that's a great example right there. I appreciate you sharing that. That was big time, man. That was
Yeah,
great.
and I go and read Thessalonians. I think it may be 18:3 and 3-5, or don't quote me there, but it's in Thessalonians. Talks about God's will in your life. And Brother Charles Stanley preached a sermon on it. And it touches on God's will, his plan, God's circumstantial will, his personal will in your life. And it really mirrors my life and how he's walked with me and how he has allowed things in my life to happen to bring me to where I am now. You can't make fine wine with grapes that's not quite ready. I think I'm not a wine maker, but I think that would be a true statement. God can't use you till you're ready to be used. And I used to think, when I look at Rusty, and there are times when I say, man, what a lonely walk. I mean, he's out here with a bunch of coaches that don't talk the way he talks, don't walk the way he walks, and is he lonely? But lo and behold, you were probably the most wholesome, unlonely person in the world. You had our Father with you on your shoulder. You don't need any more. The rest of the world can gather around and see and pick up the fruits of what you guys have manufactured. And now I'm in that fraternity.
That's
I
awesome.
see it. I feel it. I'll never be lonely again, my friend.
That's fantastic. As we begin to wrap up, you know, I'll go even deeper here. Why do you think you're still here? Why do you think you're here? Why did God put this David Brown? I know there's a lot of David Browns, but what's your purpose? Why did he put you on earth? And what are you going to do with your remaining time?
Why did he put me on earth? I think the reason I like Thessalonians is they talk about God's will in your life. And I've always been I want to figure it out kind of person. And people ask me, how much longer you want to umpire? I'm 60. I want to umpire till I'm 62. I work for two great supervisors, and you know, I hope they'll have a need to have me out on the field till I'm 62. One thing's for sure, they're getting a guy that has a perspective not only on the game, but on life that needs to be shared. And when God said, do my will, I told my wife, I said, you know, I'm tired of all this sports. I said, I could go do God's will up on a mountain somewhere and write books. And it's how he talks to you, Rusty. He said, no, he said, you have influence way beyond what the average person would ever gain. Why would I want you to stop doing what you're doing when you have this much influence that you bumped your head all your life to gain? Now I'm going to show you how to use it in a most powerful way. And Rusty, I'm having fun every day. I get up at 4:30 and I walk my dogs at 6. Me and my wife pray at 6:15. I go into a locker room and pray with some brothers at 6:30. I go to the gym. I come back and I start working on NCHSAA basketball. I start working on Piedmont Metrolina collegiate camps that Gary Swanson and I and Will Little and Andy Glenn have started. And then I
didn't even get to mention Gary Swanson. That's another one. On my list.
Look, we could go on and on.
Yeah.
And then I start planning for my umpire next spring. when God said less is more, I know exactly what he meant, Rusty.
Mhm.
And the reason he's got me here, and I tell my mom this. I said, Mom, you're 90. She's beautiful. I said, Mom, you're probably hanging around. God's got you hanging around to see me preach. I said, but he ain't told me to do that. So I just want you to stay around long as you, whatever he's got you here for, stay around. Because I know what he has me here for. I'm fulfilling. And I know this, Rusty. When I'm done with the task, I want him to say, job well done. And I won't, then I'll be ready to go. But I'll be ready to go home. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
And in 2019, we'll save some of my stories for your podcast, but in 2019, when that season started, first of all, I didn't know it then it was going to be my last one. And I would never have dreamed that 2 years later, I would have become an ordained pastor and I would be interim at a church and I would have preached, done 2 weddings, officiated 2 weddings. I was just thinking like, okay, what lineup do I put out there? But God continues to use us over and over, and he continues to use you. And I like your point about be where you are. God has given you a gift of influence in umpiring. So you don't necessarily have to leave that to be within his will. You just use that for his will. And I'll give you one last word, and then I'm going to sign off because I think folks want to hear your final thoughts on all this.
I'll say this, Rusty. I've known you for a long time. And when I was on the field and I knew I might have butchered a call that went against you, it really burns a person's heart up to when that happens to any coach. But when it happens to someone who is following God's grace and glory, it's a different feeling. And I'll just be honest about that. But I've known you for a long time. I follow you for a long time. We've never sat down and had a meal together. I think there's been a great deal of mutual respect.
Yes.
But I know going forward, I have a partner in what we need to do for God. So I know that I can call on you anytime now. And I hope you know that you can call on me. And I appreciate you having me on our stories in his glory. And I look forward to having you on his space, my friend.
Thank you. And we may not have ever been in the same dugout, but we're surely on the same team. And we know which team that is. And so, guys, you've heard it here, folks. You've heard it here. David Brown, an umpire. He is going to be there to call our games in eternity, and as many others will. And I value your friendship. And just for all those listening, if the Lord's willing and the creek don't rise, I'll be back again soon for another edition of Our Stories, His Glory.